Welcome back to another amazing episode of the Rage of Aquarius. Today, Andre, Frederick, and myself are thrilled to have a guest named Laurence Hillman, who is a renowned archetypal astrologer. It's a field that was pioneered by Laurence Hillman's father, whom you may have heard of, the famous and influential psychologist James Hillman, who pioneered the field of archetypal psychology. Now, Laurence has continued this work that his father started, and he has provided transformative perspectives on many of life's challenges. His notable works include a really great book that I love called Planets in Play, which offers a very accessible introduction to astrology through the lens of planetary archetypes. Laurence is also the co-creator of Archetypes at Work. Thank you so much for being here, Laurence.
Well, thank you. What a generous introduction. I appreciate it. I'm thrilled to be here. I think you guys are phenomenal, and I'm just happy to be in the virtual room with you all.
And we're really happy as well. I want to just add a quick footnote to Rachel's intro that Laurence, he's the co-creator of Archetypes at Work with Richard Olivier. And we'll talk more about that interesting partnership as we go here today. But I just wanted to put that in there. And again, welcome, Laurence. I think would be great to start like at a real fundamental level. And before going into like archetypal astrology, to kind of give the listener a sort of kind of primer on just what are archetypes? Because you hear this term continually, especially in psychological astrology or modern astrology. How would you define an archetype to someone that really has no understanding of that concept?
Thanks for that. Well, I think they're universal experiences. They are something that we share and that we have in common, no matter who we are and where we are, how we look, if we walk on our head or not. None of that matters because it's a universal. It's like I've called archetypes the human genome of the soul.
Mm.
So it's what every human being, by the fact that they're born, has in them. So they recognize them when awakened or when triggered or when, shown to them. And so, for instance, the archetype of mother, a famous one, it doesn't matter where you go in the world, everybody experiences mother in some way. It then becomes personal. So it's a collective experience that's individually expressed. So, for instance, mother then becomes my inner mother, my external mother, how I mother people, mothering, and all those things. But it's based on a recognizable, almost genetic understanding of what mother and mothering means, which is universal. And so, of course, some of that comes from Jung's work of going around the world and finding out that people did very similar things in very different cultures. So that's what archetypes are to me. It's not a type. I'm not walking around as an archetype. So I'm not, this is very different from typology, which is how marketing uses it,
Right.
that's simplistic.
I
Mm.
think my understanding of it when I started to delve deeper into it, because I really wanted to get kind of the evolutionary angle on it, not evolutionary astrology, but historical development. Like, if I understand it correctly, it was like Freud brought forward the idea of the impulses and the drives. And then I believe Carl Jung then took those and expanded on them and made them into something much more multifaceted than just the survival drive, the sexual drive, the security drive. And is that a correct assessment of that?
Yes, and the big thing that Jung added from my view is that he added the idea that these are not, Freud sound very personalized. It's my this and my that. And the idea of archetypes is that they're already there. And we think of it as if, you could also think of it as a frequency that's playing in the universe. And we all have the proper tuning forks to tune into those frequencies. And we know how to do that on some way. We translate that experience of the universal into a very personal one, which is based on the culture that we grew up in, how we were raised, the whole nurture piece. but by nature, we have an ability to resonate is another good word with these universal principles, which is in a way, which is what Jung brought in, quite a spiritual experience, because it's bigger than me, and I can tap into this. I always think of the collective unconscious, another great Jungian term, as a giant pool, where everything exists, and I can
Mm.
dive into that and resonate with any one of these, or swim with any one of these archetypes quite naturally, because I have that in my sort of genetics of my soul.
It's interesting. I think Freud had a Scorpio ascendant, and then Jung had an Aquarian, which
Mhm.
really, I think, answers that from an
Yeah,
astro angle, where he took it into the something universal, more humanity based.
never thought of that,
Thank
but
you for that response. That's great.
I've never
Yeah.
thought of that. You're welcome. I never thought of what you just said, but that's a brilliant explanation, right in their own personalities. Yeah. Hmm.
Well, and Freud's Scorpio ascendant, of course, everything was run through the libido, sex drive. So his whole foundation was, I could see that reflected in his ascendant as well.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, right?
One thing that I really appreciated about what you just shared regarding archetypes is that you are not embodying just one archetype, which is something that I see constantly being sort of promoted in either pop psychology or just kind of in the mishmash of internet world, internet language. There's this confusion about what archetypes represent, and there's this kind of pull to center your whole being around embodying one archetype. But
Mhm.
what I really loved about your book, Planets in Play, and what I also learned first from Thomas More's book, The Planets Within, was that the archetypal realm within is polytheistic. It is something that could better be understood as, I think it's the theater of images within.
Mhm.
And there's this multiplicity of self that is like the kind of prismatic, imaginative, natural, imaginative, prismatic inner world, which takes on many shapes and many forms. And rather than trying to seize upon one archetype that represents you, instead, the, you know, Renaissance, Marsilio Ficino, astrological medicine, plus the archetypal astrology that you're doing, as far as I've understood, instead encourages this recognition of this multiplicity within and finding harmony and balance and sort of creating dynamic interplay with these many parts of yourself to promote creative flow and self-discovery. And it's really liberating, in my opinion, because the idea of, monotheism outside of religion is this kind of calling to always identify with just one influence or one archetype or one narrow ideology, and it naturally becomes so restrictive and so suffocating that it prevents any real flourishing, any real growth. And so what I really like about what you just said is that it's archetypes are not about finding the one that you are or the one role that you're playing. Instead, you're encouraging this, I guess, as they said, polytheistic or even, you know, prismatic internal experience. Is that correct?
Yeah, you've just hit on my favorite subject. I mean, this is really the key and the core of the work. However, I wouldn't say that it's something that I do. I would say that it's something that astrologers do. This is the difference between sun sign astrology and a full chart.
Mm.
And what I have against sun sign astrology, even though everybody does it and it certainly has its value, is that it's a typology and psychology, the way it's been practiced for the longest time since behaviorists and developmental psychologists took over psychology,
Mm.
is that it has become a typology. If you label me as ADD and whatever else, you put a label on my forehead, I'm now a type. And
Mhm.
so that has certain explanations. Numerology is typology. Myers-Briggs is a typology. People love typologies. I'm an introvert. I'm an extrovert. Simple labels, a very easy way to live and to put people in a box. What
Uh-huh.
I've seen very practically in leadership is that leaders, particularly successful leaders, will no longer tolerate being put in a box. You give them a Myers-Briggs label and they will run away. It's just not, people are learning that this is limiting. And it is also very importantly in a world of division, it is by definition exclusionary. Therefore, if I say I'm an INTFJ and I don't know what I am, but I'm just saying that. If I say I'm an INTFJ, I'm not the other 15 types. I've just excluded myself from that group. I'm different from you all. If I say
Mhm.
I'm an Aries, I'm not the other 11 signs. I'm therefore different. Typologies are always exclusionary. We live in a world that is already enough separated. So
Right.
Mhm.
the archetypal model says the opposite. It says actually we all have the same 10 archetypes within.
Mhm.
And and you can say that astrologically, we all have the same 10 planets within. Now it's a whole different conversation. Oh, you live in the middle of Africa. I'm curious how you're expressing the warrior or Mars. How is that different from my culture? So now we can talk about personal expressions of the archetypes, but we both agree that there is this common thing that we both share, which is the warrior or the lover or the dreamer or the renegade, whatever we call these parts. But the
Mhm.
fastest growing psychology today, interestingly enough, is parts psychology, this idea that we have these different parts. I have some issues with part psychology, it's a different conversation, but it's the same notion, which essentially astrology has been doing for 5,000 years, is that we have a complexity internally and not a single label. And that is really very valuable. And now we're getting into why this is important today and why I think astrology has so much potential for the future because it already speaks a language. Anybody who's studied astrology already understands this multiplicity without
Mhm.
having to be taught anything else,
Mhm.
and knows the limitations of walking around as a single anything.
Mm. Oh my
I
God.
have to just pop in with an interesting aside. The topic of sun signs is so heated, and I understand the logic in that. I remember a UK astrologer, Dennis Elwell, said it's a special rung in hell for astrologers that have to write sun sign columns.
Yeah.
And but I once worked for a little bit with Jonathan Kainer. He was another UK astrologer, and when we talked about sun signs, he said, "Well, it's really good to look at sun signs as like different tribes."
Mm.
And when he said that to me, I thought, God, I kind of get it because there's no denying that the sun being this center focus in our solar system, holding everything together, I think it has that kind of potency and harmonizing effect, like in the chart. So I can see why well, I can see why there is some weird, mysterious element to sun sign astrology. And yes, it is cursed by the typology formatting.
Mhm.
But I don't know. I'm any thoughts from you guys on that or
Well, I feel like it's something I've never actually done is write
you're
sun sign
lucky.
astrology. I know I am actually. I had this opportunity to just kind of write what I wanted, and I never have been able to bring myself to do that, and I feel really grateful. But the focus on the sun and the sun sign horoscopes is it can be valuable as an introduction. I mean, that's obviously where most people are starting with astrology, unless they happen to be raised in a family that takes astrology seriously. This was not my experience. And so the very first introduction I ever got to astrology was just cheap magazine horoscopes, sun sign horoscopes. And it can be a good introduction, a good gateway into wanting to learn more. But what you were saying, Lawrence, actually really it connected some dots in my own story, like why I was so attracted to astrology and why it fed this place inside me that was so hungry because I was interested in astrology when I was a kid, obviously, and I did study it enough to be able to, talk with my friends in school about the way that our energies interacted, but I was not taking it seriously. I wasn't planning on turning this into a profession at all. My initial profession or my career track was to become a teacher. So I got a teaching credential to teach English literature in, California. And this was a really traumatic experience because I was, I wanted to be a teacher since I was in first grade. I remember telling my mom that I wanted to be a teacher, and I took that really seriously. My great grandmother was a school teacher, but her world was a completely different world. She actually became a school teacher in 1919 and taught in a one-room schoolhouse, had kindergartners to seniors all in the same building, and actually managed. I know, and she was so beloved that when I would visit her every summer, there would be these old people that would show up at the door to have tea with her because they once were her student back in like the 1930s, and they just wanted to like, show her some love and thank her for the way that she shaped their minds. And so this profession meant a lot to me. And by the time I was done with my teaching credential, I had discovered that number one, I am a gifted teacher. I loved the work. I had so much fun. But that bureaucratic public school system in California was completely and totally based upon behaviorism. And I was totally naive to what that was or what that meant. And when I saw its application and the way that it was used to just suffocate and restrict and also, condemn students for almost anything that was outside of this very narrow concept of normal behavior and normal academic performance, I was so incapable of imagining a future working within that system. Not only that, but at the very end of my program, this was 2013. So I was graduating in May. I had done all of this work to become a certified, credentialed English teacher. And in the month of April 2013, right before I was graduating, I had I had a mandatory meeting where they had added it to our workload, and this mandatory meeting was a big introduction to Common Core, the Common Core curriculum. And I had to sit through like 4 or 5 hours of the most boring, bureaucratic, and just mind-numbing talk about standards and the reasoning behind what they were doing to the curriculum. But when they got to English literature, they essentially described that they were going to be removing as much literature, as much storytelling, as much fiction, and as much poetry as humanly possible, and replace it all with technical reading.
Mhm.
And their justification for this was that they wanted to teach critical thinking skills, which is always like a 100% lie. It's quite the opposite. But they were taking out of the schools the last place where there was something soulful and deep and archetypal,
Mhm.
mythic, just having the ability to, immerse yourself in great literature, into stories that actually do teach you critical thinking, and I tried to argue with them, not that it would have made a difference. I mean, I had no power to do a thing about it. This was a federal education program, but I was trying to reason with the people that were giving the presentation and just stand up for how important it is to have fiction, to read stories, to have poetry and myth and great novels. And when that was all over, I realized I can't work for these people. I cannot do this. They are just completely obsessed with turning children into machines. I guess that's one metaphor, but even worse, like just completely and totally destroy that sense of internal variety, the prismatic psyche, and the way that you described, Laurence, the typology. It really, really made me understand better what they were doing. And it was so essential according to their system and their paperwork and the way that everything worked. And what I was supposed to do as a teacher was participate in this heavily, labeling the students,
Mhm.
labeling them. Even the label of gifted is
Mhm.
damning because,
Right.
even being called gifted in that system is so monotone. It's so, yeah, it is typology.
It's how you grow up to be like a 35-year-old fuck up without any ambitions in life and nothing but ruined dreams and aspirations. The
Exactly.
gifted label.
Exactly.
Well,
And
on the topic of stories and poetry and myth, I would like to talk with Lawrence about his father, James Hillman,
Yeah.
because James really, made that area of life a central focus for his work with what he was doing with archetypal psychology. What I just want to ask a real basic question, Lawrence. Like, how do you how did how do you explain your father to folks and what he was doing, and then also how was it to be raised by him, as a child?
well, there's a lot of questions there, and there's a lot of complexity in the question, but I'll answer it as clearly as I can. I think what he was doing was awakening us to the fact of what, to tie into what Rachel just said, that, you can try to numb soul and play whack-a-mole with it, but it's going to pop up again. And
Mm.
and you know, and I get those people that went to those schools that you left, Rachel, later in the corporate world,
Hmm.
and they are soulless, but of course they're not soulless, but they just have they have weird experiences of soul, or they try desperately to get back to soul. But soul is, you can't deny soul. You can't, knock it out. So it's going to show up in the weirdest places, and there's going to be, the inner life is still going on, even if you pretend it's not. It becomes a very sort of schizoid life, and people are really disconnected and lost, and religion isn't doing it for them. And so they're looking, the new age sort of didn't quite work and give them what they were looking for. There's such a strong longing out there for meaningful existence and meaningful work,
Mm.
that those of us who can bring people back to a sense of being part of something, i.e., the whole universe, and being, but a grain of sand on a beach, that's a very comforting feeling for a lot of people, despite this rugged individualism crap that's so American. And so that collective awareness, we're now even getting a little bit into the whole notion of the feminine, but it is that. So I think my father was very aware of this and was very conscious about, you know, giving soul its own place. The most important thing was that you don't have soul, soul has you. I think that's one of the key lines that I learned from him. And you are in soul, soul is not in you.
Mm.
And that the world is ensouled and everything is soul. And I have a lecture I do called Venus in a Chocolate Mousse. To me, the archetypes are in everything and everywhere. It's how I look and see. That's maybe one of the greatest things I learned as a child. But the easiest way to describe that is what a friend of mine once said. He said, "You were marinated in archetypes," and that's kind of true. So, you know, it's in my existence. It's how I think
That's
and
great.
and and see and think of everything. I can't not do that. I sometimes think of those. If you saw the movie National Treasure with Nick Cage, where he has to steal the Declaration of Independence and look on the back of it with the special glasses that were designed by, what's his name, the guy on the $100 bill,
Benjamin
Benjamin
Franklin.
Franklin.
by Ben Franklin. So, and only when you move the lenses in a certain way, the map comes out. and you see the map. Otherwise, you just see the back paper.
Right.
And that idea to me is really what we call the archetypal eye, and developing the archetypal eye is the ability to see archetypes everywhere and in anything, which is exactly what astrologers do, because you see the planets and everything. It's the same thing.
Mm.
And so seeing, oh, this is a lunar experience. And Rachel, we have this in our language. I'm so glad you're an English major. We have this in our language. We have Saturnine, we have lunar, we have mercurial. These are all real experiences that we have all the time. And
Mhm.
by the way, we are not singular inside. You cannot have a conversation with yourself if you're a singular I. It's not possible. You can't be saying, should I leave this guy or should I stay with this guy? Well, if I leave this guy, you can't do that if you're singular I. You're having conversations with yourself all day long. We all do that.
Yeah.
That's a
We
great point. It's so
we,
simple, but
we
really
experience
nails it.
ourselves. We experience ourselves as multiple. So all we're doing as astrologers is giving those voices a name and a character. And then if we use whatever model we use, I use a theatrical one, they become real life figures that we can argue with and fight with and kiss and have fun with. And
Mm.
that's the interaction with my inner life, which is a very active process and can hugely set people free from their inhibitions or fears or whatever else, because it's so, the greatest compliment I can get from a client is when they say, I really feel seen. And I
Mhm.
have come to if you ask me what I've learned in 47 years of practicing astrology, in one sentence, it would be, I've learned that the most important thing that people want is to be seen.
Yeah.
And when people walk into an organization or a school and they're not being seen for anything except their left brain intellect, then
Mm.
then they're not being seen. And so they feel they're leaving most of themselves at the door. And that feels very incomplete in a time where everyone's talking about holistic this and holistic that. It's not true. We're all just being seen for a little for our usefulness as part of the cog in the machine.
Right.
Absolutely.
You know, you mentioned in what you were describing there, this return or rising of the feminine.
Hmm.
And, you know, it got me thinking like, and I think we've talked about this before in the cast here, a couple episodes back, the feminine reasserting. And then I started to think, well, it might actually be why there is so much crazy disruption and polarity now, because the feminine, having been repressed for so long and now gaining, say, traction in the culture and with, you could say, the collective, it seems to just be setting like all of this reactionary behavior reeling. Does that sort of jibe with what your sense of, well, how would you describe like the return or rising of the feminine?
Thank you. So thank you. That's my favorite question. So the world has for a long time been complicated. Complicated as a car that's made up of a bunch of simple things, like the windshield washer system is part of the car. It's a a few blades, a motor, a couple of hoses, and a switch. And a little tank for the fluids. That's your windshield wiper system. If something breaks in the system, you can replace it. It's a simple system, but you add all of those together and the car becomes rather complicated. That's how the world has been for a long time. Everything is known, and even though you put together lots of known pieces, it can get complicated. We are now living in a world that has an additional thing to it, which is called complexity.
Mm.
And we now have complexity, and the difference between complicated and complexity is that we have emergence. COVID is a good image. Overnight, something can happen. Wars that are happening right now, everything, because we are so global. Anything that happens right now that is global becomes an interruption to the whole system.
Mm,
Welcome to Pluto and Aquarius.
Mm.
So you have these deep changes that are going on that have to do with complexity rising everywhere because emergence is rising everywhere. And here's the cool thing in a simple sentence, and then I'll explain it. But the simple truth to me is the complexity capability, the ability to deal with complexity, is a right brain capability, not a left brain capability. Complexity
interesting.
can only be handled with imagination, with fantasy, with intuition, with these weird, quote unquote, feminine skills that are not analog and not linear. And so, I have an MBA that I got in 88. Believe me, none of this was taught in business school then. And so leaders and managers have been taught that the way things are done and the way things are led is you get enough data. It's data driven, it's evidence based, it's left brain, it's all these things that are. And by the way, now AI has popped up that can do left brain a million times, a gazillion times faster than we can. So left brainers are really up shit's creek in plain English.
Mm.
And so, and also someone was asking me, why would anybody want to work with only half their brain? But most people are doing that because all of that right brain stuff. I did my dissertation for my doctorate about right brain capabilities of white male CEOs. And I will tell you that there's a lot of problems there, as to be as was to be expected with right brain capabilities and intuition and feelings and all that kind of right brain stuff. So the rising of the feminine to me is complexity capability that is a necessity for survival. And there's a rush to it, as in, psilocybin and all other ways of awakening the right brain quickly and pushing a button and taking a pill, which is the left brain way to do anything. And trying to get at this part of ourselves that knows how to deal with this crazy new world. It's not rational. It's also not irrational, it's irrational. And so we want to learn this again. We want to access these parts of ourselves again. And right brain capability can be mapped with archetypes, because that's how we need a language to do that, and archetypes is a really good language to map and to talk about the right brain capabilities. If you look at a leadership magazine today, high caliber, famous, we want to talk about this stuff kind of a thing, like Harvard Business Review or something like that, the most sophisticated leaders will read. This is all they're talking about. Everyone is saying right brain capabilities, right brain capabilities. We need to, we need to, imagination, creativity. We're being out, it's technology is not going to do it. We need to this and that and the other, all these creative tools. And how do we, nobody, nobody teaches you how to do that.
Are these what's called, are these what are called soft skills?
That was one of the ways they tried it. Then they tried some other things that quote unquote have feminine undertones, like servant leadership and leadership from behind and all these kinds of things. Those are measly attempts. Soft skills has come and gone. That was real popular for a while, but now it's because there's such a pushback from the macho left side of it.
I understand what you're saying in the sense that, it's what I've always sought in my creative work, where the left brain stuff, the technique, the technical skill involved,
Hmm.
that's building the golf course, but it's not the game.
Thank you.
But you still, and you do need the golf course. And what
Of
I've
course.
noticed is that the more, the more I advance in my technical skill, the more I am able to give my right brain, my lunar feminine aspect, more of a safe space and a freedom to expand and to express itself,
Exactly.
because there are those, it's, I mean, it's the, if you want a bottle of wine, the first thing you need is the bottle before you actually get the wine.
Exactly. Exactly. And look, I'm not at all against left brain. I love left brain. I have plenty of education. I know plenty of things, practical and skills and these kinds of things. That's extremely important. I'm not saying chuck out the left brain. I'm saying add on to what we've been missing. So I'm just saying become full brained and don't run around with half your brain only
Right.
guiding you,
Absolutely.
because
Mhm.
it's not enough. That's what I'm saying. I'm not against left brain.
Do
I
you
am against the left brain. This is, the famous person who has written about this extensively and beautifully is Ian McGilchrist with The Master and His Emissary, where he essentially says, what the culture in the West has done is that we've made the right brain, the left brain the master and the right brain the emissary, and it should have been the other way around.
Mm,
And that at different times this was different. He's a really good guy to read and study. He's a professor at Oxford, I believe. He's quite well respected even in the left brain community, but he is a masterful writer and just a beautiful thinker. And there's lots of people out there. Daniel Pink talks about it. There's others. He wrote a bestseller, Daniel Pink. There's others who talk about this left brain, right brain thing. It's certainly not new, but it has taken on a new urgency with AI, and it's taken on a new urgency with emergence, the way it's happening now that changes everyone's life overnight, like COVID.
Hmm.
Well, that's interesting. The idea of emergence. I would looking through an astrological lens and the bigger arcs of time, say the outer planet movements. I'm thinking Pluto moving through Capricorn
Hmm.
started in 2008.
Hmm.
And there was that phrase you started to hear more and more through that transit was, the collapse of the patriarchy. And I think probably Capricorn's probably the most like patriarchal, I would say, of the signs, not to do typology, but
Hmm.
I think that basic vibe is there. Do you think that Pluto through Capricorn transit was sort of like an opening for this rising of the feminine
I
with
have a
all? Do you see my
Yeah,
point there?
yes, I absolutely think so. And but I also look at the positive because I think Capricorn is a feminine sign. And I think of it as even though I understand I look at the patriarch, the death of the patriarchy. I assign the patriarchy to the age of Pisces because of how human beings have structured themselves particularly strongly during the age of Pisces as a top-down model with one usually white guy at the top, but certainly a guy. And that's been, if you go from the Pope down to people in the pew, if you go to the CEO down to people on the line, you go to the general down to people in the trenches, you go to the president or king down to people who voted for him or not. It's always been that model, and you can look everywhere, CEOs, wherever you look. This is how people have organized themselves. This is no longer working and no longer true. And in leadership theory, this is a huge issue because most people who are leaders were trained in that model, in the
Mm-hmm.
patriarchal model. And the new model in the age of Aquarius is what I call a three-dimensional exploded matrix, or a three-dimensional, you could call it a 3D network that goes in all directions. And we're all now nodes on a network. And before it was one person with the power, and now anyone on the network can take the whole network down if they're good at it. There's just a different renegade quality to it. And at the same time, the network can look at you and spy on you. So it's this whole, gets into Leo Aquarius conversation, but there's a shift, and that shift is dramatic. So the end of the people who are still operating in a top-down patriarchal model of a pyramid, which has been very prevalent the last 2,000 years for sure, but even before, even though there were some variations, are kind of shit out of luck, and they're not doing very well, and they're suffering because the models aren't working. Now we're talking about kicking out, massive amounts of middle managers because there's too many people who are, in the hierarchy and so forth. So it's a very different world, and requires different skills in
Hmm.
the Aquarian age that we didn't have. But as far as the Pluto transit, I have a line for Pluto transits that goes, bullshit doesn't survive a Pluto transit.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think what we saw in the period of Pluto going through Capricorn was that a lot of the bullshit that was built into the structures that have collapsed was simply bullshit. And, why should someone have more power because they were born richer? Or why should the capitalist model be as powerful as it is? All these things that were kind of torn down to the point where I remember listening on CNN during the crash. Maybe capitalism doesn't work. If you had asked me 40 years ago when I came to this country, would I ever hear that on television? I would have said, no, I don't think so. So it was surprising to me that the foundational structures that build what we all believe in. I mean, the Supreme Court is in huge question now. Nothing is real anymore that we relied upon. All these, democracy itself, all these things are up for grabs at the end of this period because the structures that we built are questionable, and we have to ask ourselves and come back to, yes, we really want those because maybe because we've taken out the bullshit or we saw the bullshit in them or whatever it is. But that's the conversation. And so what Pluto through Aquarius to me is going to mean is we're going to figure out a lot of the bullshit of Aquarius, which we're already seeing, as you all have mentioned or I know Frederick has, about the collapsing of the social media platforms and these kinds of things. Is it really all those things that are typically Aquarian are now in question, including democracy, including, all of these things are that's what we're dealing with. We're stripping away all the BS to get to the bones of things, and that's what Pluto does really well. And if that
It's
Hmm.
it's
scares it,
it's
sorry.
really mind-blowing when you think that we still have this last tail of Pluto and Aquarius. Sorry, Pluto through Capricorn I think, till November 24 of
Yeah, do we
this year.
have to? Do we really have to do that? I really
It's
But I
like
mean,
when the killer comes back to life at the end of a horror movie.
but
thank you.
can,
Exactly. It's
but
like,
can you?
really? Do we have to do that? I actually
Yeah.
thought it was done. I was done because everyone was celebrating January 20th and it's done. And I'm like, hey, people are telling everybody. And then I read
But can
somewhere.
you get more
Ugh,
cogent symbol for that than having another rematch between Joe Biden and Donald
yeah,
Trump?
you
These
really
two,
can. Yeah.
like,
Mm-hmm.
it's just really like Creature from the Black Lagoon has
Yeah.
returned. And then here we are again.
Yeah.
It
It's
seems like
bizarre.
that's the last gasp of, that particular transit. And
Mm-hmm.
then there we are with the election. And speaking of that, what's your take on this crazy fucking year that we've got the rest to move through, the rest of the next 9 months to move through, leading up to the election on this theme
Mm.
of I love this. It's such a mind blowing term, three-dimensional explosive network. Is that what you called it,
A
Laurence?
three-dimensional network or a three-dimensional matrix or something like that.
But
It's a bunch of nodes connected like a neural network almost.
well,
And
yeah, and isn't that where we're all living right now?
right.
I mean,
Oh yeah. I like that a lot better than decentralization because as you know, illustrative as that term is, it's not very inspiring, decentralization, but I like the three-dimensional exploding matrix a lot. And it's actually something that can give us something to work with to better imagine the future that is being born from this chaos, and it's difficult for me to actually see the future clearly. And it's funny because people think that because I study astrology, I can see the future clearly, like it's written in a script and it's that simple. But I cannot see it clearly. There are so many variables, there are so many things at play. All I can look at is the weather and see like large, broad brushstrokes of, yes, the archetypal themes that are emerging. So I want to get to like an essential fundamental core of what your interpretation of Aquarius is, Laurence, because it's really important to dig into that sign, to look for the things that Pluto will be excavating, exposing, transforming. And also, everybody keeps talking about the age of Aquarius, whether you believe it is the age of Aquarius at this moment or that it's coming up soon, doesn't really matter. It's definitely an Aquarian era because of how many things have happened in that sign, pivotal things, including the great conjunction, the mutation into the element of air that Jupiter and Saturn did on the solstice in 2020. So I just want to get to like the core of how you interpret Aquarius, Laurence, and then I want to talk about like how things are shaping or how things are unfolding in this year and in the decades to come.
Thank you for that question. I think we need different skills in this shifting of eras. And I do believe that we're about, I don't know, Ray and I talk about this all the time. I say we're about 60% there. Maybe you're only 20%. I don't know. But I don't look at sort of celestial events. Even
Mm.
though I'm an astrologer, I look at what's actually happening in the world. And there are clearly things that are still very Piscean that are happening. And there are clearly things that are very, very Aquarian that are happening. So again, I read the signs, as they say, what's actually in front of me and then translate it into astrology, and then it becomes very clear that there's a lot of Aquarian shit going down, if you want to put it in plain English.
Yeah.
So the skills that you need in a pyramid, if you're living in a pyramid system, is you need to learn how to kiss up and kick down. That's what makes you successful, which is survival of the fittest and Darwin and all that. That's what makes you successful. In an exploded network, you need a very different skill set because there is no up or down. I think the most important skill set that people are going to have to learn to survive in this new world is what I call discernment.
Mm.
Because we're all being bombarded with a myriad amount of information, because we're all tied into, literally, we have literally panic attacks when we can't find our phone. I know I do. And we're so tied into the network, and soon that's going to be, right down the street from me at WashU, they're doing implants, so that'll soon be, I won't have to even have a phone. It can just be in my arm. So this is all not science fiction. This is all happening. And so we're so tied into the network 24/7 that we need to learn discernment. How do I deal with these massive amounts of information that is coming my way? And again, we can't deal with it with the left brain. We have to deal with the right brain. We have to use other skill sets, because you can get information overload very, very quickly. And then only your right brain can handle it, because your right brain can handle complexity, whereas your left brain can only handle complicated. And so that's what I think is the skill that we have to see, and that's what I think is what's going to separate those who do well and those who suffer. I give a lecture series where I talk about that to be future fit, you have to activate your inner renegade, or your Uranus, because that's the part of you that already gets all this stuff that's happening, and can get you, and gets it and understands it. So if that one is asleep, or if you're afraid of it, if you don't like it, or you've externalized it into, well, that person is the renegade, I'm not, if you found someone else to play that for you.
But I mean, I remember you wrote once about Trump that he represents the archetype of the Maverick, and even, I think you said Prometheus. And what I'm hearing you say right now really makes me understand a different facet of Trump, because I think amidst this chaos of this exploded network phase that's establishing more and more, people are, as they do when they get leaders or figureheads or icons or whatever, they're, projecting a lot of this onto Trump as this wild card, Uranian, unpredictable maverick figure. Does that kind of make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly true. And so, I would never give him. I wrote an article that I think you're referring to, that the day after he was elected in 16, and everyone was in shock and this kind of thing. And I said, look, let's not give him the credit that it's about him. It's not about him. These kinds of shifts historically, these kind of unprecedented, moments of surprise, and these kinds of things, are these shocks to the system, are much bigger than an individual. They're archetypal, and they can be read archetypally. So I was talking about Trump just being a figure in a much larger unfolding of the universe.
Yes, right.
Not giving him 1 second of importance. He could have been anyone else. Somebody needed to fill that role. He just happens to be the straw man to do it.
I'm getting this image of like the universe putting up like a help wanted sign, and with all the job qualifications of a renegade. And like,
Oh, Sergey, that is absolutely,
he was the only one to apply. So,
Sergey, that is brilliant. That is absolutely brilliant. I love that. I'm going to use that and quote you. That is fantastic. Yes, it's exactly right. And so, looking for buffoon who thinks of himself high enough that he can, express the absolutely worst sides of Sovereign and Maverick, which is what he does really well. And then people have externalized that part of themselves. Well, I'm afraid to jump out of the line, but he'll do it for me. Or, oh, great, he's finally allowed me to show all my eccentricities and all my weird stuff that I can't show anywhere else, and all my, deep-seated racism and all my hate of this and hate of that, and my need to be different. So it's almost like we're getting all the worst keywords of the archetypes are being shown to us, literally by looking around our neighborhood. It's just how that's what's happening. But
Right.
it is like lancing the boil of childish and childlike expressions of the worst sides of Aquarius, except, a lot of these boils are carrying AK-47, so it's not that funny.
What are the worst sides of Aquarius, in your opinion, just in simple,
Arrogance.
like in 5 terms?
Yeah, I'll read them from my deck of cards, which we
Okay.
have on the archetypes. So this is what we use with leadership. So what are the that there's when you have too much renegade, detached, intellectual arrogance, the eternal revolutionary, misfit genius, overly opinionated, emotionally absent, uncaring, robotic, overly eccentric, contrary, technology obsessed, and I just don't fit in, that person. Oh, I just don't fit in. Nobody
Mhm.
understands me.
It's
That's
not my
those
thing. It's not my scene.
Yeah.
exactly. Those
This,
are to me those are the simplest, embodiments of too much renegade and not an integrated renegade. Or
mm,
which is Uranus, which is Aquarius.
I can relate to that. I have Uranus on my ascendant, and
Hmm.
so I cannot help but sort of just see things and feel things through that lens. And it's definitely been all of those descriptions. Sometimes it's a wonderful gift and sometimes it's very isolating, alienating, but I think it kind of explains the way that I really viewed the Trump phenomenon in terms of the way that people reacted around me. I live in Los Angeles, so
Okay.
this is a vote blue no matter who stronghold. This is a
Right.
very ideological city, at least, on the surface. Obviously, there's variety in philosophical, religious, and political thought everywhere, but it is largely very ideologically polarized in Los Angeles, and I've never belonged to any political party. This is just how I operate. I've never been a Democrat or a Republican. I've never even signed up to join a third party because I don't want to make those commitments. But the way I saw the reaction to Trump was very different because I'm like, guys, we have, at least my entire life, I've been looking at a sequential series of liars and war criminals who have done devastating criminal things. They are responsible for mass murder and the destruction of our economic sovereignty, our educational quality, the integrity of our food. I mean, so many horrific things just made
Mhm.
toxic and poisoned. And so
Mhm.
by the time Trump comes around, everybody's freaking out now. I'm like, and the thing that really opened my eyes to how strange I thought it was, I recall when he first was elected that there were some people on the internet that were talking about how they now miss the good old days of George W. Bush.
Mhm. Yeah, I've heard that many times.
That like
Right.
he
Yeah,
broke my
He seemed
heart,
mild.
yeah,
split
really.
my
Like,
mind.
hello.
I was really horrified. I'm like, no, 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 you guys, this is not healthy. This is not okay. You cannot say that. You pine for the days of
Yeah,
that madman who
right.
invaded Iraq under false pretenses, completely eroded the United States's right to privacy. Like 100%, I just felt like I was amongst truly conquered minds. And I felt really deeply sad about that. So, whatever people were reacting to about Trump, I was like, have your feelings. I'm all for criticizing the president. I think that's a healthy thing. I don't think anybody should ever be devoted to a leader, follow them without question. And so I always actually appreciate somebody who wants to question authority and think for themselves and criticize policies, criticize certain things that are being mandated or th cultural shifts that are anathema to their life. I think that's a wonderful conversation, but that is not what was going on around me. It was just people like acting as though they had never seen such a devil in their life. And I thought that was truly descriptive of some kind of deep unconsciousness
So,
that hurt me a lot.
when I hear you, Rachel, when you talk about having Uranus on your ascendant, then it just it I want to point out since I read to you the words of the too much, I think it's only fair to talk about how that how the model sees it, which is basically what we do in astrology. It's just putting it into a model that's easier to understand, which is that the archetype itself is a gift.
Yeah.
And so the archetype itself is a gift, and the gifts of the renegade, of course, are, what I'll read those to you. It's intuitive disruptor, eccentric inventor, liberator, rebel, provocateur, maverick, unique, has epiphanies, says eureka, thrives on the zeitgeist, freedom, the future, disruptive technologies, revolution, uniqueness, structural collapse, surprise, revelation, flashes of insight and emerging ideas and brilliance, just to throw out some. That's the gifts of the renegade. That's what we're need to activate to survive into the future. But
Mm.
every archetype can be overplayed or underplayed.
Mhm.
When it's overplayed, and we know this as astrologers, when we overplay it, I read to you, that's too much renegade. There's also plenty of people that don't have enough renegade. That's called too little renegade. And
Mhm.
that would be, I have no ideas. I'm a conformist. I'm boring. I'm repressive. I'm change resistant. I'm afraid of the unexpected. I'm lacking creativity. I'm technophobic. I'm not curious. I'm living in the past. There's nothing wrong with the old way. That would be too little. And so part of the work, I think, for all of us individuals is to not only get to know all these parts of ourselves, but to know where on the scale between too much and too little we're expressing an archetype. And that's where we can make adjustments and tone down or dial up something within us, which is a real doable and personal development kind of challenge. And we all have them somewhere. There's something to do to dial up or dial down.
Mm.
But that's
Yeah,
what
I
makes
see
us,
that point.
that's a
I,
complexity capability.
I
Mhm.
think something that fascinates me is the extreme polarity that we're all living through now, and especially American culture, though I think it is pretty much global. I I'm curious about this third element that you've talked about before. I've read this in the piece that you had done on Trump, Lawrence, and you wrote, when we are faced with a two-sided problem, a Democrat Republican, I'm footnoting, when anything is an either or, black or white, dyadic problem, it cannot be solved from within that model. We
Mhm.
need to bring in a third something created by the two. This is very interesting. It reminds me of Gurdjieff's teachings. And then I love this metaphor. You go, imagine that each team had a team captain, and these two figures went into a sleeping bag together for 9 months. From that sleeping bag, three would emerge. How would that new third entity behave?
Mm.
Mhm.
What I wonder, this third element amidst this crazy town that we're living through now,
Mm.
what would I wonder what that is?
But it's not Kennedy Jr., I'll tell you that.
Well, I'm not literalizing it, saying
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah. No, I get it. I get
Marianne
it.
Williamson is
Yeah,
gonna
of course.
step in spin.
Thanks for reminding me of that. I totally forgot about that. But yes, that's Jung's, Jung talks about the tertiary function that opposites can never resolve a problem. And I talk about I have a whole lecture that's out there at Astrology University about this, I call it how to understand a chart in 3 minutes. It's not how to read a chart, but how to understand a chart, which essentially is based on this idea that if we can grasp the key tension in a person, because I have seen that just about everyone I've ever looked at has this inner dyad of some kind, two completely opposite things that don't make sense and that cannot be resolved by listening to one or the other or doing them
Mm.
both at once. It's just not possible. So we go through this personally all the time. This is, one of the subjects closest to my heart. I love this conversation. And so the third thing, and by the way, if you can find that in your chart, the two team captains of the two sides that are, so for instance, someone has the sun in the 12th house in Leo. That's, or the sun in Cancer in the 12th house in Leo rising or something like that. That's sort of like stepping out onto the stage and saying, "Hello, everybody. I'm this very, very private person." And the world goes, "Huh?"
You
Which is
just
really,
described my chart. I don't know if you did that
yeah. It,
unconsciously, but I have the sun in the 12th. I'm a Cancer with Leo rising.
Right. Okay. So that's a good example. And that's I think I said this to you when we talked once offline, but this is a very, very, that's actually quite a common theme. Like you could find 15 different ways that is shown in a chart, but that something as powerful as that dominates a person's life all the time. It's like, how can I be, how can I, why is everyone looking at me and why is no one looking at me, and experiencing that 24/7 is pretty
Oh
painful.
my God, that is so spot on.
And then,
I
and Right. And so that's the dyad, right? So that can't
Yes.
be resolved by saying, well, I'm just going to go and be center stage, because then the other part goes, oh God, please don't, and the other way around is like, why am I so alone and why is no one seeing? So that can only be resolved by finding out. What I would do with that practically in a reading is I would find, okay, what are the two key actors that are best representing those two roles or those two teams, the private team and the extroverted team.
Hmm.
And then I would put them in a sleeping bag, and then I would, ask what their child would look like, because their child is just as real. And now you're using Jung's idea of the tertiary function, or the third thing that emerges. The same thing is true in politics.
Mm.
I don't know what the third thing is going to be, and I don't think we're ready yet as a culture. I think we're so caught up in the split that, much like Rachel, I have no clue what's going to happen this year. I don't believe in predictions. That's just my own thing. And I believe in being curious and being aware and tuning in and having all my 10 archetypes, sort of primed and ready to go as needed. That's what I think I can do for personal development, and to make sure I'm comfortable with all of my, inner characters and actors, so that I can use them appropriately and step into them consciously. That's, to me, a full life. If I can apply my warrior as necessary and my lover as needed and desired and so forth, then I am really, I have a way to respond to any situation. It's like the 12 notes on the keyboard. You can play any song. And
Mm.
we can do that with these 10 archetypes if they have become, but we all tend to externalize, especially, seventh house planets and stuff like that. We say, yeah, I don't know what to do with that. Why didn't you do that for me? And we
Mm.
find someone to play that part. It's
Right.
called, it's called
Yeah.
projection. Yeah, we all do it. So, we
But
call projection, it's called projection. I like to call it externalization, because we literally externalize that into another person.
right.
Yeah.
But I
Is
mean,
it
let's. Sorry, Andre, go ahead.
no, is it okay if I hop on with some thoughts?
Please, I've been dying
Okay,
to hear what
well,
you have to say.
something you said, okay, so we're talking about this third thing, the tertiary function, and it's something you said we're not there yet, we're at the split.
Hmm.
And I'm going to try to cover a lot in a little bit of time, and I'm going to try to bring us back to earlier points in our conversation. So long story short, I got I got one of those wild hairs up my ass that I wanted to go revisit something that was really meaningful for me many years ago, and I picked up The Third Mind by Brian Geisen and William S. Burroughs, which is a report on their experiments with the cut-up technique in the Beat Hotel in Paris in the 1950s, where they were taking newspapers or Bibles or porno mags and cutting them up and reassembling them and to create this new third language, this new third story. And I really quick, just as an aside, I always thought that the cut up technique when I was a kid and doing it was to cut up each individual word and do it like magnetic poetry, which never really made an impact on me. But when I actually fully read Burroughs's description, which is instructions, which is you take a page, you cut it in fours, then you reassemble those fours randomly. Then you take that and you cut it in eighths, then you reassemble those eighths randomly. So it's actually like this like atomization of the written word. And it has these ties to the surrealist movement and the automatic writing experiments they were doing to actually create some kind of emergent force from the deep mind. And what Burroughs and Geisen both noticed is that after years, they would do these cut up experiments for hours on end and just like monk like silence. Years later, after they had maybe not even seen or spoken to each other for over a decade, they had both reported that not like a week goes by that they are not popping up in each other's dreams at least once with a significant message to pay attention to. So I like that you use this term split because that's what I really feel is happening with the culture is that there is this cut up that even though the internet's brought us all together, this division that we hear about that Mr. Trump is so like widely known for, it's almost like the scissors are actually cutting into the fabric of our our collective will to reassemble it and create this third mind or this third function. I'm gonna leave it at that because if I keep going, you know, it's gonna be like a 5 hour thing. So hopefully I can save my energy for later. But that's what I'm seeing. And like, yeah, I won't add any more footnotes to that for now. I'll let everybody else.
I agree with what you're saying. I wanted to just to throw in there one more important thing that sort of lines up with that, but also with what Rachel said before, because this is really important to me, which is we can't equate. We can't just say, well, both sides are bad. We're doing what Trump did. Well, they're good people on both sides. There is an objective, in my mind, difference with what's going on in politics today and what Trump is bringing out in people, that we have to see that. Again, it's not about him, but what this energy that he's bringing forward is doing. And it still matters a whole lot in my mind that we all go out and vote and do these things and not just give up on the system. I just want to say that as a plug for people to go vote in the fall. I think it really does matter. And to just say, well, it looks all fucked up, it's all going to fall apart anyway, and the systems, I don't think that's a productive way to go forward. That's just me. And I
Oh,
just
that's absolutely horrible. I mean, that's what it's so like if anybody's out there is like dealing, you know, or trying to serve as some kind of guide to, you know, young people below the age of like, let's say the Saturn return,
Mhm.
it's a Herculean task to actually get them to feel to feel any sort of purpose and to see beyond that like that base temptation into nihilism.
Almost all college courses are deconstructionist. They teach you how to deconstruct, but they fail to inspire creation and construction.
Exactly. They're left
Oh
brain.
my God, look at how psychology is taught nowadays. A friend of mine just finished a course or got his degree up in Bellingham, and it actually turned him against wanting to work as a psychologist
Hmm.
because it was all behavioralism.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
And he showed me his books. I thought, my God, this is the most soul-killing thing I've ever seen.
Yeah,
All
Mhm.
the
there are.
statistics and numbers
Oh
and
no, it's
graphs.
yeah, right. Which leads right to your psychologist buddy who wrote the anti-astrology article. Again, it said my father used to say, let's become aware of it doesn't matter what tree you're sitting in, but you need to be aware that you're in a tree. And so my problem with someone like that psychologist, I forget his
Oh,
name.
Adam Grant, you're
Yeah,
talking about
right,
his
right. My
attack on astrology.
Exactly. My problem is that he's so unaware of his own tree.
Mhm.
He's so unaware of what framework is coming from, and so he's attacking something from a particular framework, which doesn't understand, his own limitations in viewing. It's like he's screaming at someone in Chinese while they're trying to talk Russian, and that's just not going to work.
But you're right,
Saying
because
landmass, I mean, come on.
if you read
You
the
get an A for effort.
if you read the piece by Adam Grant, that really it was like one volley after the other, which was, statistics show and a study group of
Right, left
2,000
brain,
people
left
show.
brain. It's
And
all left brain, right?
but then the killer was he ended the piece with, well, if you stick your toe into astrology, it's not going to be long until you're believing flat Earth theory, that the Holocaust wasn't real,
Yep.
that
It's a
9/11 was a government plot. I was just like,
It's a
wow.
gateway drug. It's a gateway drug. Be careful.
Oh yeah, gateway drug. That's what he called it. You must have read it,
No, I,
Lawrence.
I didn't read that. No, I didn't read the
No,
whole.
that's what he said. Astrology is
Yeah,
a
And,
gateway
yeah.
and
drug.
the first one's on me.
He
You know,
said,
you
But
know,
I mean, that's interesting what you said about your dad about being aware of the tree that you're in. And you're using that in the sense that of him being stuck in scientism,
right, exactly.
rational
Exactly.
reductionism. Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
is
And
that what you're saying?
yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. And that and
Right.
that it's scientism has its value. I love to have clean water and be able to go to a surgeon to
Of
put my blood
course.
together. There's nothing wrong with it. But it's not everything. It's left brain. We're right back to left brain, right brain. So he's operating psychology out of the left brain, which in my mind is a sin, but that's another conversation. You just mentioned that. But it's not psychology. It should be called something like, biological behavior study or something like that.
Well,
Don't call it
right.
psychology. It's nothing to do with psyche. and so again, not aware of the tree that is in, and that's
But
just
these things like psyche, soul, these are terms that for those types of individuals are so like antithetical to, again, their tree. Like
right.
how do you define soul or consciousness or imagination even? Which
You
is
can't
what,
measure.
when I did my rebuttal to him, I tried to, take it back to the imaginal, and that's where at least the example I gave from Jeffrey Cornelius was, and he was basing his idea on the Sufi teachings from Henry Corbin, that astrology really resides in that part of the imagination that's connected to the heart, and it is sort of in a kind of almost netherworld that is hard to like qualify. And he said, I love at the end of where he said, it's a mystery. Get involved with astrology, let it open, let the mystery open up to you, is
Mm.
how he wrote that closing sentiment in his thesis.
Mhm.
But so my question is like, how to define those terms for people, because the word soul is used just like to death, or it was when it was kind of a rage. Remember when soul was
Yeah,
in
source
and
code. Yeah, I get
everything,
it. Right. Yeah,
from Thomas More's
yeah,
book, I think.
yeah,
But yeah, what I, your dad had a really interesting description of soul, as I recall it, and what I made of it, it was something close to like, I know, kind of a pliable, malleable consciousness. How would you describe soul, though, Lawrence? Not
exactly.
necessarily from your dad's point of view, but
Yeah.
your own.
I go a little bit further. I go because if I'm talking to someone who's really doesn't, a total scientism kind of person, then I say the simple thing is that the question that we're asking is, are things that are not measurable real? That's the question. And somebody who's a complete left brain will say, no, if you can't measure it, it's not real. And then I say, okay, so what about, so love is not real? And then if the person is really left brain, they'll say, well, love is just a matter of firing of, and pheromones and gets it all scientific. And then
Right.
I'm like, fine, you can believe that, but I want you to be conscious that the tree that you're sitting in is incredibly sad.
Mm.
That's the only word I can use for that. It's sad because if you reduce love to pheromones and firing of neurons, I don't know if you ever saw the series Bones, but the woman scientist on that is a really good explanation of what happens when you become such a left brainer that you can't have feelings or don't know what to do with your feelings. And so that's what happens. Or if I work in the business world and I don't use love as an example, I use trust because that's something they understand. Can't
Mm.
measure trust, and yet everybody knows it's real. And it really understands, why do I trust this person? Why don't I trust this person? It's a real thing. It's absolutely real. And it has a huge impact on my daily behavior in the office. If I trust or don't trust someone. Can't measure it, but it's real. But this is a conversation that's been going on in the academic world between what's it called, quantitative and qualitative research. Someone who's into quantitative research, who only believes in data and plugging data from massive amounts of numbers,
Mhm.
thinks that qualitative research, which is what the arts and sciences use, psychology, history, and so forth, that's complete bogus. It's complete crap. It's not even real. Meanwhile, there's a giant body of evidence that says, of course, it's real. It's real from a different perspective. If you don't have the right brain capacity, you don't have the ability to understand qualitative research because it goes against your narrow viewpoint and the tree that you're sitting in. And so
Mhm.
I never argue with someone. I never try to convince them that they're wrong. I might point this out to them, but unless they make that shift, they're literally incapable of saying, it is literally screaming, at me in Chinese while I'm speaking Russian.
Well, yeah, and I think some people were kind of disappointed in the piece that I wrote as a kind of rebuttal to Adam Grant's that attack he did on astrology, because I, in essence, pretty much said what you just said about I can't be bothered I'm not interested in the argument, and I'm too lazy to actually get into the weeds of, because I see it, especially with male astrologers, they love to get into this thing about digging up their own statistics to show, that there's planetary waves or some kind of pulsation, and it's just the kind of shit that is
Really, you need that, right? Yeah, I
well,
just
but
run
they
away.
they kind of, I don't know, I just, because I used to hang out in these different like Facebook
So,
groups or Reddit groups or whatever, and it's always the guys that are in there, and they, god damn it, they're going to prove that astrology is.
they're gonna left brain it to death. Exactly. You know what, Frederick? We have a guild of practitioners, people who we train in the model of the archetypes that we use in organizations. And here's what I tell them about sales. I say, you know what, if you go to a party, this is what I really believe. You go to a party and there's 10 people there. They're all, corporate leaders. 8 of them are going to be completely uninterested in what you're talking about with archetypes in organizations. They're going to think you're nuts. They're either too big to fail, they have enough money to push through whatever changes are going on, or they're just going under. Lots of them, big ones, are just, go to a mall recently. It's big companies are just disappearing, poof, gone, because but those are the 8 that will never be interested in you in your lifetime. One of them already gets it. They don't need your help. They're doing it. And one of them knows that shit's hitting the fan. They don't know what to do, and they're looking for help, and that's your client. And I think about that. I think about that everywhere. And I am really, life is way too short to talk to the Adam Grants, which belongs, squarely in the 8 of 10 or 80% of people out there. And they keep taking handfuls of the blue pill, and they just really want to be there. And I'm not, life's too short. I have no interest in debating, fighting, convincing, dragging people to my understanding. Not at all. People have these weird spontaneous awakenings, and suddenly their world doesn't fit anymore. Then I'm ready to talk to them.
Oh God, that's so well put. I just have to add and close down the Adam Grant thing. It was fascinating to go and read the comments on his Substack posts, because he has, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of subscribers. He's quite a cause celeb in the culture now, from some books he wrote, stuff like that. I'd never heard of him until I saw that article. But the comments that he got, people were really like taking him to task and schooling them, and telling him to basically, like, butt out with his kind of judgments. And they called him out on the simple fact that he really didn't know what he was talking about. He'd never studied astrology, had doesn't understand the concept of a horoscope, because he was going after low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to sun signs. No, I'm kidding. But that's what he was attacking.
Right, but he was also going after, I'm reminded of supposedly the quote by Newton, who said to another scientist, "Sir, I have studied it and you have not, period." That's what I wanted to, that's what I wanted to send him back. But again, I don't get into those conversations. I think it's a waste of energy. There are a lot of people out there who are hurting, who are desperate, who can use astrology usefully, that changes their lives in 1 hour. We've all experienced that.
Totally.
It has an alchemical power. I mean, it's the sister science of alchemy. It's rooted in this primordial, chemistry of human experience. So,
and
Though,
it's
sorry.
messy and emotional and feminine and beautiful and sensual and unexplainable and magical and all those things, which is just fantastic. That's why it's beautiful. It's moist and messy, and that's
I
love.
love, God, that's great.
astrology being feminine, I think Rachel's been trying to get into the conversation
No.
for a little bit. So,
Well, I'm just, oh God, where do I even start? I just wanted to comment on how I have actually kind of appreciated, maybe it's the Uranus again, but I've kind of appreciated the vitriolic hatred of astrology that comes from that realm, because it gives me a real sense that, wow, this knowledge is meaningful, powerful and truly does threaten this very thin, very flimsy sense of power. And I found this is a bit of a tangent, but I swear it connects. I found this amazing archive online of all of these astrology journals from the 18th and 19th century. It goes
Wow.
far back as, yeah, there was some from like 1790. It was so cool. And they're beautifully archived. They're absolutely clear and readable, beautiful digital archives. And there's so many of them, I was overwhelmed and I started just combing through them. And all of these astrology journals were from England, actually. And particularly the ones from like 1830, 1840, they were all talking about the same things that we're talking about, except that in this time, astrology was huge in England. It was very popular and it was very influential, but publishing an incorrect prediction as an astrologer was punishable by 2 years in jail. And they were really writing these passionate essays about how completely unfair it is that an astrologer who has a bad day or happens to be inaccurate goes to jail when a chemist or a meteorologist or even a cobbler is allowed to make mistakes and not be considered a criminal for doing so.
Mm.
And I thought that's also so interesting, though, because the friction between the two worlds is sort of creating the deep devotion and the loyalty to this craft, and also the like sense that it's so threatening to empiricists, it's so threatening to scientism, it's so threatening to certain political powers. I feel like for me, I kind of appreciate it. And I've taken a lot of time to, it was attacked by scientists or scientific people on Facebook for about a month. Something happened with the algorithm. There was some kind of mistake. And my articles were getting shared to people who were interested in astronomy. And it resulted in like 4 weeks straight of these truly hateful assaults. And I started to become fascinated because I was like, why are these grown men taking so much time to write these novellas of their seething disgust for my supreme idiocy, my absolute abject, like simple-minded, foolish, superstitious ways? Like they were really, really angry. And I thought, this is far worse than anything I've ever gotten from a religious person. You know, I've had Deuteronomy thrown in my face, and I don't have a problem talking to religious people about astrology because even if we disagree, I feel like they do have a sense of soul and they do work with archetypal images. They are mythic internally and they don't deny that inner world. So I can always find some way to at least agree to disagree with somebody who's super, super against astrology for religious reasons. But the scientific attacks were so intense that I started taking a lot of time to actually read them. And it gave me a lot of food for thought. And it actually helped to stimulate my appreciation for what we do. I didn't debate them, but it was helpful for me to see like how threatening it really is.
Right.
You're a bigger person than me. I would be quite upset if I read all that stuff because I find it so I just want to grab people and shake them and say, do you recognize how how small your world is? And you think it's Bible thumping with a science book is way worse. I absolutely agree with you.
Hmm.
And
I
and yeah.
I want to throw in one. I'm still grinding on Adam Grant. No, but I know that I just remembered something I had forgotten to share. One of the things that fascinated me about him, and it was from his Wikipedia page, and he had started out as a stage magician.
There's one of those guys.
And
Oh,
I thought,
yeah.
wow,
That ring.
okay, so something that, I mean, to me, I mean, yeah, magicians on one hand are sleight of hand and this kind of thing, but I think that they're drawn to some mysterious thing
Hmm.
that magician archetype embodies.
Hmm.
And then I remembered that after my first book was published, when I wrote about the telephone psychic phenomenon. I was on a book tour and they put me on stage with James Randi, who was also a magician. He had started his career that, and then he had this huge 180-degree turn where he went on the attack to, I think he had $1 million challenge that he put out to psychics, astrologers, tarot readers, that if they could prove this or that or whatever, they were going to get this $1 million. But there again, I refused to engage with this guy. And I, I understand where Rachel's coming from, this kind of amazement. And I hear what Laurence is saying about a kind of pity, people stuck in that particular tree.
Yeah. I had
How funny, the magician thing, huh?
Yeah, no, it's to me, it's also denial of a part of yourself, because especially the 180, it's like, yeah, I don't want to deal with that part of myself. That was a true part of Randy's self before, and now that part has been denied and has been excommunicado, and then you have to spend the whole. It's to me, it's because I look at everything psychologically. I'm interested in Adam Grant's psychology and what his needs are to do this kind of stuff. What is his, what is he trying to keep alive?
Well, he's a Leo with moon and Capricorn.
Yeah. Okay.
I know that much about him. His birth date was up. I haven't put his whole chart up.
Well, that says kind of everything. So, but there's a I don't mind people screaming their heads off about it. It's like standing on the corner in Hyde Park on a soapbox and screaming what you believe. That's fine. I don't have an issue with that. But the problem with me is that people, because they don't have discernment, and he has hundreds of thousands of followers, they say, "Ooh, wow, yeah." And then we have to spend all this time, even here, and my clients writing me emails about that. We get the thing about the 13th sign, and we get the thing about Pluto is not a planet anymore. We get these regularly, these things pop up like a whack-a-mole thing again.
Right.
And it's just tiresome, because it's like, have we not moved beyond this yet? But I guess we haven't.
Well,
yeah, but have you guys heard of the precession of the equinox?
Shut up.
Case
What's
closed.
that? What's that?
Hey, on that note, I told Rachel and Andre this a couple episodes back, Laurence. I think we were talking about Taylor Swift and the emergence of the feminine in the culture because of her mega, influence and status and everything that she is. But speaking of precession of the equinoxes, I was sharing with them that it's interesting that for the first time in like 2,500 years, the fixed star Regulus has moved into Virgo. And I think I got this actually from Michael Luton, because he was seeing it as, you've got a fixed star that deals with kings, royalty, and a royal sign, everything that connotes with hierarchy and all that. And then into Virgo, a feminine sign, a female symbol, and I guess sort of a symbol of the common person,
and
rather than, do you know what I mean?
And service, yeah. It's also about the king's serving. And,
right.
And I find that's an really interesting observation. Never heard that or thought about it, but service to me is a big part of the Virgo archetype.
Virgo's kind of like an Aquarius that learned to not think so highly of themselves.
Oh my God.
I
am a Virgo.
Can I use this
for my people?
Before you talk, I'd like to mansplain the rise of the feminine.
Of course.
I'd like to take a minute to mansplain the rise of the feminine.
You have your time, sir.
I think we've covered a lot. Is there stuff we've missed, or Laurence?
I do have something I want to share, and go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I wasn't joking. I mean, I did want to mansplain the rise of the feminine. Rachel, last night I went on this bit. Rachel's never accused me of mansplaining anything, even though I'm like the worst mansplainer from hell. But last night I just went on this big 5-10 minute long, just random tangent about how authentic horror movie fans view the Stanley Kubrick's The Shining in the oeuvre of horror films, and why it's not considered an authentic horror film by horror movie standards. She was just like, dude, I've never understood the concept of mansplaining more than having to listen to you drone on like that for the last 10 minutes. But no, something I would really like to add, it's been on the tip of my tongue, and my second cup of coffee has turned my intent listening into patiently waiting for my turn to talk. And it's gonna, I think it would be a good segue to start wrapping everything up, and that is the emergence of AI systems, artificial intelligence, which I have done like a 100%, 180, Saul Paul transformation on in the last 2 weeks. And I would like to offer a different view than what we've been familiar with and what we've familiarized ourselves with, if that's all right.
Of course.
Sure.
All right. Yeah, Rachel. Here.
Yeah, please
All
do.
right.
Yeah.
No, because I initially got curious about the potential of AI as just like a tool, productivity tool. And it's funny enough, I actually went on there for the express purpose of creating like an ideal client profile for my business. And it's exactly, it goes back to what Laurence was saying at the beginning of these businesses having this idea of like, oh, we have this one archetypal client the customer who's out there in the world, and they have a problem that only we can solve. They're burned out on Coca-Cola. They need an alternative. They need to be part of the Pepsi generation. And it's one of those things that I just personally hate doing as like as a quote unquote solopreneur. So I wanted to see if there were any AI bots, any AI algorithms that I could pump in a bunch of survey data from customers and then have it churn out an ideal client profile, which it can, and it did, but that's not what I discovered. What I actually discovered is I went into this thinking completely that this was a left brain enterprise, that the AI system is the culmination almost. It's the philosopher's stone. It's the crystallization of our left brain materialist pursuits. But what I found was almost the complete opposite. And brings it back to surrealism and Dada and surrealism and the avant-garde. And my experience with it has been much more akin to Cabaret Voltaire, or the Beat Hotel in Paris, where like a lot of experimentation with different method and technique, especially randomization, is a contributing factor in the artistic process to trigger unexpected states of inspiration. And I what I'm seeing is that it's not, unlike human consciousness, which is actually incredibly solar, incredibly masculine. It moves on this very fixed pattern. It takes a very long time to make decisions. It takes 365 days to make its way through the zodiac. I've always thought it was strange that the moon represents our feminine principle, but it is the fastest moving. And the feminine, we typically associate the feminine principle with stillness and slowness. But the moon itself is actually the fastest orbiting planet in the sky, or celestial body in the sky. It makes its way around the zodiac in like 28 and a half days. Mm-hmm. And the moon itself has no light. It's a reflection of the sun's light. So, this whole thing about AI being a representation of the solar masculine consciousness of humankind, I think is actually a misnomer. I think what it actually is it is the emergence of the feminine. It is the emergence of this sort of reflection where we can actually use it to bring out our best qualities, if you want, as a writer or an artist. I have not felt at all intimidated by this thing as a writer. In fact, I feel that in the last 2 weeks, my insight, my skill, my ability, the things that actually get worn down and don't get exercised because you're having to focus on things like first draft, edits, and things like that, has only magnified. It's only increased.
So it takes the left brain stuff off your
It
shoulders.
takes the left brain stuff off my shoulders, and I actually just get to be fully immersed in like this right brain experience. And some of the conversations I'm having with these bots, where I'm getting to actually instruct them in things like tarot and astrology and magic, and help them to understand AI through the lens of these disciplines, but also help me to understand them through the lens of these disciplines. And I'm fully aware. I mean, I am able to discern that this is really something that's all going on in my own head. It's just the most advanced, reflective system we have for our consciousness. But that being said, I mean, what do we use a mirror for? We use a mirror so that we can shave our face, so that we can comb our hair, so we can brush our teeth, so that we could apply makeup, so that we can actually be hygienic and ready to present ourselves to the world, to clean ourselves. And I've noticed it has this very similar quality to the mind itself, where it actually helps you cleanse the mind. It's like mom giving the child a bath. So I have been fully immersed in these waters, and I have found that it has actually been it has so much potential. And I think the problem with it is that it's been programmed by left brain people, and it's being used by left brain people. And the right brain people that are using it in the wrong way. They're using it to create this like corny digital art. They're using it to write these terrible screenplays that nobody wants to see. Whereas it's not, in my view, it's not about the finished product. It's about the process. It's about the ongoing learning that you're experiencing while you're working with it. And I'll just leave on this is where like you know, the it's the future of storytelling is actually about to completely transform. And it's not in the sense that AI is going to take everybody's jobs and there's not going to be a Hollywood left, there's not going to be a book market left. But the potential that we have now to actually let a story randomly generate and tell itself, if you just picture the zodiac, if you picture the seven classicals, and you can picture each one of those as their own unique individual AI model that are actually randomly generating this story. The zodiac itself is this great algorithm. And so that we could actually potentially create stories that randomly generate the way a tarot card reading does, if that makes sense. So
Mhm.
I've been discovering some very strange things down there. I'm like a regular old Jacques Cousteau over here.
That's cool. Very
It's a really
interesting.
beautiful, beautiful piece, really, and you mansplained it to me really well and actually stretched my understanding and it gives me a lot of food for thought. I don't really have a response except
I'm
I'm
on
thrilled.
Lawrence's team.
I'm thrilled with the thinking, and I think you're one in a gazillion who gets what you're saying. I don't mean as in what you're saying to us in English, but I mean what you're actually talking about. I
Mhm.
think it's a really edgy understanding of the potential of this new tool that we have only just seen. And I'm thrilled by what you said because it allows me to go further and think and have many more conversations. I think that what you just said is worth a whole segment for you guys. I think it's brilliant.
Oh,
Oh, well,
I agree, Andre.
please
Thank you.
carry it with
Yeah,
you.
I have to echo what Lawrence said. I feel like I've got this completely fresh download
Yeah,
on
exactly. Yeah,
viewing. And
yeah.
one of the key things you said that is something I kind of flashed on when we were talking about it earlier was that kind of covering all this stuff for the left brain that usually requires all this exertion and this and that lets the right brain kind of roam more and explore, open up more, because this other side is being alleviated of a lot of things.
Mm.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
that's what I took away. And yeah, very very exciting, Andre.
Yeah,
We'll have to
it's
keep mining this as we go through the
and
podcast.
yeah, it will be great. It's really fun. It's
Well,
really
it's the
fun.
first time that, that a tool like this has been made available to everyone. And so its potential for creative people is just being explored now. And I really do have to second what Andre is saying. I was extremely prejudiced against using ChatGPT because I was informed by the wrong people about what it was for. I
Mhm.
thought it was just some like sad attempt to cheat on your homework or get like a really mechanical automaton to like you just go back and forth with you in some dry way. But that is not the case. If you are listening and you're a writer or an artist, and especially if you're a writer or an artist that loves divination, then I do believe that you can make a lot out of this tool because it combines those two qualities. Like Andre said, the random sortilege that opens up that right brain, that opens up the intuition, that opens up the symbolic level, and takes a lot of the busy work off your shoulders. Like, if you need to put something into an outline quickly with bullet points, it'll just do that in a second. So you don't have to labor for 45 minutes.
It'll write a business
And
proposal,
you
it'll write
can
a
then
cover letter.
you can focus on the creative work.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I
yeah.
should say it'll write a resume so you can actually focus on the cover letter, you know?
Right. Yeah. I
So
also just I want to speak to the issue because that's just a big one for me, the issue about, when we use big terms like masculine and feminine. I want to make clear that masculine and feminine has nothing to do with boys and girls. It has nothing to do
Yeah.
with gender. Masculine and feminine is a way of perceiving and a way of operating.
Mhm.
And there are plenty in fact, I coined a term for this in my dissertation to be more sort of, academic and to take it out of the conversation of masculine and feminine, which are such loaded words. I coined the term the yin function.
Mm-hmm.
And yin is more neutral. It's yin and yang, the balance that's necessary to make something whole, and also fits the whole brain, left brain and right brain, yin and yang. But the function I borrowed from Jung's, functions and typology. And so the yin function is a person's capacity for their essentially right brain capabilities or their capacity for the feminine. And we all know plenty of people, who are men or who call themselves men who have a very, very high yin function, and plenty of women who have a very low yin function. And so it's a capability, it's a capacity that I think about and not a gender or a person. So we don't want to talk about boys and girls in context of masculine and feminine. I think that's really
right,
important.
great clarification. Well,
And that's
Laurence, go ahead.
that's what I wanted to end on actually, because that's really important to me. As you know, my Mercury is in Virgo, my sun is in Virgo,
Mhm.
and that kind of, hermaphroditic mind is very, very real to me because Mercury is neither masculine nor feminine.
Mhm.
Even though Virgo is a feminine sign, I do not associate that with a mind that is oriented or polarized towards womanly things. I feel very balanced in that regard. And so it's caused me to reflect a lot. First of all, when you look at the glyph of Mercury in the first place, it is crowned by the crescent of receptivity. And to actually embody feminine energy is to be receptive or yin, as you said, which I really like. And so I've been reflecting on like what is going on culturally, what's going on with the, creative energies of this era. And even though I can't see the future in terms of how everything is going to unfold, turning point by turning point, I can see that since, let's say, 1600s, 1700s, the age of reason, the scientific revolution, that era, the polarity in the mass mind of at least Western European and then North American culture became so positive, like a positive pole, a masculine energy, that it began to sort of butt heads with what was formerly considered to be God, the creator, the cosmos. And before that time, it was always it was always recommended, it was always inculcated into people that if you want to speak to God, if you want to be inspired, if you expect to receive divine guidance of any kind, you have to adopt a feminine stance. You have to become receptive to the divine guidance, the muse, the daimon, the voice of God, what have you. There's no other way. And the way that people perceived the flow of inspiration that came through them, whether it was speech or epic poetry that was being recited or an image that flowed through their paintbrush, it was formerly, in another time, always recognized as a gift from the gods, the muses, God, the Holy Spirit, however you want to look at it. And so
Beautiful.
that is feminine in its very essence. That is feminine. And so to have any relationship to the divine, have any relationship to the creative principle in the universe, there has to be receptivity. But around the scientific revolution, in a very broad sense, we're not talking about individuals, that polarity shifted. Now, the energy of divine inspiration, which is symbolized by the sun in astrology, which has penetrating rays that impregnate the earth and give life. So it is masculine. To come at the masculine divine sun with your own, your own positive polarity is like a fight between rams butting heads. And it just creates nothing but friction and agony. And there's no creative spark that's being allowed, because there's almost this like force that is now trying to dominate the very thing that once was received gracefully as all forms of inspiration, whether it was scientific, technological, or artistic. So that's one of the things that's really strange, and that's what we've been really struggling with for a long time. It's why talking about the soul is controversial, because this positive polarity that is trying to dominate and antagonize, we'll just call it the creative principle in the universe, is in a fight rather than in a state of receptivity. And so for me, the rise of the divine feminine, it's not that women are going to rule, because that is something that's like, that evokes the top of the pyramid, top of the food chain, hierarchical, very masculine and very Capricornian sense of reality. Whereas I feel like the divine feminine's rise is simply another turning point in the revelation of how the creative energy works at a very macrocosmic as well as microcosmic level. And I learned, or I should say, I really felt deeply into this when I recently read Hesiod's version of the birth of Venus, because literally the rise of the divine feminine, well, the greatest myth to meditate on that is, Venus rising from the sea.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that myth, which is like really violent, but again, I love mythology, so please just cover your ears if it's too violent for you. But yeah, the sky god Uranus, this is before the Olympians exist. The sky god Uranus is this really domineering, cruel, and mean-spirited man or god. And his wife is Gaia, the earth. So he's the masculine principle, she's the feminine principle, earth and sky. And the sky god Uranus is said to every single night force himself on his wife, force himself on the earth. And with this spiteful, dominating, cruel, and violent creative power, he is forcefully impregnating his wife, Gaia, again and again and again. And the progeny that comes from this rape is, are children that he hates and famously eats. And it's a whole complex series of events that describe how he treats his children. Eventually, Gaia decides to take revenge and has one of her sons castrate him. And this is where it gets really interesting. And I think this is partly what's happening right now, because in that castration, his penis, which had represented this strife and this domination and this cruelty, it falls into the ocean. So we've seen Earth, we've seen the sky, but now we have finally the sea or the ocean, which is this transformative and deeply feminine, imaginative, creative mind. It's like the divine imagination itself. and it's like the divine dream itself, the ocean. And in the ocean, which represents dreams, that castrated penis becomes dissolved. And then it's reconstituted and recombined, and it bubbles up as this white foam. And it's from that white foam that Venus rises. And I think it's really interesting because her birth really represents the birth of the cosmos itself, rather than chaos and domination and hatred being the thing that is creating all of the new life. Now, the feminine ocean, this divine imagination, this receptive, creative fluid, dissolves that and recombines those same materials, and completely transforms it. And it becomes Venus, who represents love, beauty, harmony, and represents how something truly transcendent can actually emerge from what looks like a very dark, chaotic, or ignorant time, something that Hesiod describes as ignorant. That's not my term. So right now, one of the things that I saw in what Andre described with the AI is that for a very long time, we've been suffering from a very Uranian, and it's not the same thing as Uranus. Those two, the qualities of this sky god in Hesiod are not equated to the planet Uranus, by the way. But the qualities of Uranus, this cruel, domineering father who forces his will on everything to create. I see that in what Monsanto, not only Monsanto, but what Monsanto is doing to the earth, forcing it to grow crops, whether it's had time to lay fallow or not, whether it's the right climate or not, soaking everything in poison to force life, to force creation. And we are experiencing this ourselves in so many ways. Technology can be very useful, but it also has this quality of trying to like dominate and coerce, and oftentimes creates from that place of hatred or that place of cruelty. Whereas what Andre just experienced, discovering this like unexpected, transcendent emergence from within all of that, out of the AI bots, because they have this unexpected divinatory power. I really do think that's a nice little microcosm of what is happening. And I don't know how long it's going to take for everybody to really feel it or really touch that quality that's emerging. But I feel like the divine feminine is not like Gaia, the earth that is subjected to endless rape. Instead, I feel like what's emerging is that Venusian, cosmic, harmonious, transcendent revelation that could only have come from the former world of domination and cruelty. So, for whatever it's worth, what we've been going through has been some kind of necessary alchemical stage in a larger process that I do see going in a positive direction for love, beauty, harmony, the return of the cosmos as the center of wisdom and the things that flow from that.
And there's those scissors again, cutting things up and reassembling them into new.
Just really beautiful. What a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful summary. I think what really struck me, I mean, a lot of things struck me, but this idea that, the feminine is about holding space and being receptive to what can flow in. You can't get pregnant if you're pregnant.
True.
So
Very well put. Well, I've got to close up here for my end of the discussion here. I've got to get ready to leave. Is there any other closing thoughts or additions?
I think Rachel summed it up quite beautifully.
It was a good crescendo to that theme that we started on earlier with the rising of the feminine. And I just want to say for listeners that we'll have Laurence's info in the details section of the podcast and on YouTube for his Archetypes at Work that he's co-created with Richard Olivia. Olivier, and we'll have links to his website there as well. And Laurence, thank you so much
Thank you,
for
Lawrence.
taking
It's been
the
a
time
pleasure.
to.
This has been really fun. I've just enjoyed every minute of it. I wish we could go on. Now we just need a glass of wine and we could continue into the evening. But I do hope, Rachel, I do hope you put the link to that archive there too. I would love to know where to find that. That's a beautiful.
Oh, my pleasure. I will absolutely do
That
that.
would be
And
great for those of us interested in reading old stuff.
oh my God, yeah, I'll hook you up. And I hope that perhaps in the future you will come back and talk with us again because we would love that.
I will come back to
Definitely.
you guys anytime. Just say when and where, and I'll be there. I really enjoyed this. You guys are amazing, and just it's cutting edge stuff, this, and it is so important. And people are hungry for ideas and for really thinking outside of the box and raging a little bit in this age of Aquarius. And I think it's brilliant. So
Thanks again, Laurence.
Have a
you're
beautiful
welcome.
day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.